It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have my co-host with me, Andy Grabner. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Brian. I tried to get you out. No, good. I just made funny faces when you were talking, but nobody sees my funny faces because they only listen to the audio. You did a good job in not getting distracted. Or didn't you look at the video?
I did a little bit, but you're saying you made funny faces, but I couldn't tell what the difference was between that and your regular face.
Okay.
See, so Andy, background, I come from New Jersey. Andy just showed me the New Jersey state bird, which is the middle finger. So, because some people say flip the bird, Andy, that's a U.S. euphemism for that. But you wouldn't know that. And John Kelly thinks he's talking, but I'm going to have him all muted. So he's like, haha, I'm commuting. But he's not going to be able to get a word in. He could say whatever he wants right now, but I'm going to cut it. So if you want to say the dumbest thing in the world, John Kelly, go ahead and say it right now. But anyway, Andy, let's continue. Should we really delay since I already mentioned the name of who was going to be on here and people have no idea who he is? Should we just keep talking stupidly and make him wait longer and longer, or?
Yeah, but that means we will have a long episode that nobody wants to listen anyway, and so I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No. Well, you'll have. I'm sure you're going to come up with a good segue.
That's true.
Because people are waiting long, Andy.
That's true. They're waiting long, and maybe they are jumping off. They are bouncing off our website and go to a different podcast, who is much better than our podcast. So this would be, for instance, a business metric that I would track when I look at our statistics. How long can we keep it? Okay. How long can we keep people engaged? No, in all seriousness, actually, that is, I think, was that a good segue, Mr. Brian Wilson?
I think that's a very good segue.
Yeah. And let's segue over to our guest today, Mr. John Kelly. You think you are known in the industry by a different name. What's your other name?
Oh, yes, Tech Shady.
Tech Shady. Where does this name come from? Come on.
Because I'm standing up. No. I'm from Detroit. Everyone in Detroit has a rapper alter ego. So, we have Big Sean, Slim Shady, Rise to 5'9", but on the list. I had to fit myself in there, so we came up with Tech Shady.
And it's like some shady.
Not that I know anything about technology, but I am the shady part, so there you go.
Well, so it's you're just like us, not knowing anything about technology, but but we like to talk a lot about it. So, John, for those, I think it's the first time you're actually on the podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Is it?
This is.
Not for us trying.
And maybe the last.
We'll see. Hey, for those listeners that haven't had the pleasure yet to come across you, to see you, meet you in person, or talk to you on the phone, can you give us a little background, like what you do and how you ended up in the position you're in right now, which means talking to us?
Absolutely. About 20 odd years ago, I started as a pre-sales engineer for a performance management company called Precise Software. A lot of the current Dynatrace people came from Precise over into Dynatrace. And then about 8.5 years ago or so, I started as a sales engineer, supported areas like in the DC area, spent a lot of time down in Dallas, got myself a little Southern accent while I was down there for a while. And then the last couple of years, I've really been focusing on Power Dashboard and advanced analytics, right? So more of a specialist role around all things down. So how can I work with businesses to help them maximize their Dynatrace investment and deliver business analytics on top of everything else they're doing from an observability perspective, all that. So just really working to tie it all together and deliver some great content.
Pretty cool. Talking about great content, I think your performance clinics and also your hot days, your hands-on training days at Perform has always ranked, I think, in the top position anyway, like top, right? Your power dashboarding sessions have always been extremely well attended, well received. I know you don't need more praise because you are, but I think it's a good, it's really fantastic what you're doing. And before we started the recording, we chatted a little bit about you constantly are you're very close in interaction with our product team to tell them what you think, what people need out there when it comes to business analytics. And this is actually really then, the topic that I would like to talk more about. I remember Klaus Enzenhofer and we did webinars together about BizDevOps, where we talked about tying in business metrics and aligning everything to business when it comes to making also technical decisions. And we came up with the term BLOs, business level objectives, because we thought makes a lot of sense. The world talks about SLO, service level objectives, but if we try to align it with business objectives, let's call them business level objectives. How do you see this? I mean, when you talk with people out there, what are business KPIs or business level objectives? Are they, who defines them? What are good examples? Who is responsible for them, and also who is held accountable in case you don't meet them?
Excellent question, Andreas. And it's actually really a simple but yet a complex answer, right? Could it be more confusing there?
Yeah.
It's simple in the fact when you start out because it's a business level objective, so business. And if you really kind of strip that apart, the main thing, and sometimes the really only thing a business is concerned about is a conversion, right? Or conversion rate. Right, so every application has conversion goals or multiple conversion goals. And it could be something as simple as, hey, I'm going to go to Andy Grabner's performance and download the latest performance clinic. Yeah, and I have steps to take to get there. And once I complete the download, I convert it. We think of it also traditionally e-commerce, right? Where I go to a site, I search for a product, add it to cart, check out, and purchase it. And it could be, anything, a lot of different things where I'm just trying to submit a claim, or transfer funds. So every business, every application is designed with a function in mind, or multiple functions. And so each one of those are a conversion goal. So when the business has a conversion goal, that's the easy part, because it's like, hey, what are those goals? And like, for example, my Easy Travel application, it's purchase travel, right? That's my conversion goal. Now, the hard part is everything that supports the application, right? So you look at all the infrastructure, just everything that's out there, from infrastructure to code, right? That's supporting my Easy Travel application. There are tons of metrics, right? Millions of metrics that come into play. The hard part is now I have to, and I'll make this statement, I'll probably make it a few times throughout the podcast. Every metric has some form of relationship with a conversion goal or multiple conversion goals. Okay. Bearing that in mind, then the challenge is just to find, which metrics are the ones that, have the most deviation or the most, kind of exceeding their baselines, and then understand that relationship to the conversion goal. Right. And I'll give an example of maybe there's like this application that's running and I start to see a drop in my conversion goal. At the same time, I see a spike up in, say, CPU I/O weight, right? So logically, you think about it, if CPU I/O weight increases, that means users are waiting on CPU to become available to process something as they move through like a typical user journey. The more they wait, probably the more chances of them exiting and abandoning and not converting. So there's a relationship there. And when you go to define the business level objective, you have to start to look and say, hey, what is my conversion rate when we have no CPU I/O weight? And then maybe what is it at 0.5%, 1%, 2%? And you kind of keep going up as you're, this is kind of like a role of a data scientist, right? That kind of starts to consume this data, because the goal is to find out, where is that breaking point? Where do I start to see my conversions trail down? And once I start to understand that, and I now understand the relationship between a metric and my conversion goal, right? And then I could establish my BLO based upon that metric, right? And say, for example, at 3% CPU I/O weight, I start to see a deterioration in CPU. So maybe I set at 2%, 2.5%. And then once that BLO exceeds, then I know that's something I have to go address, because the worse it gets, I'm going to be impacted by conversions on the back end.
Mm-hmm. So got a couple of questions here, but I start with the one that you just highlighted, because I always thought with business level objective, I always talk about metrics that the business understands, but you're talking about I/O metric. So that means you're saying a business level objective is actually on any type of metric, even if it's technical, as long as you know this metric is going to have an impact on the business, which is conversion rate, for instance.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So now the tough question then is, and you mentioned, data scientists are maybe needed. How do you understand? How do you select those technical metrics?
Good question. Sorry to cut you off, but hey, man, this is my topic. I know. Fire it up here. Let's go. There is things where you can set just pure business level objectives on conversion rate, okay, and kind of the things you would typically see from a business perspective, number of sessions, right, different things, traffic to the website, all that. And if that exceeds, the problem is that you don't have maybe the right context. When you start to marry the data, the metrics, right, from the technical side into the BLO, then it becomes a little bit more business aware. Now, the challenge is that there's a lot of metrics. So that's why you need things like AI, to be able to then manage and process that auto baseline, everything. AI does a great job, for example, of understanding dependencies. This metric is, dependent on this host. This host is dependent, has a dependency with this app server. This app server has dependencies with all these services, right? And it does a great job of farming that out so that when this metric starts to exceed its baseline, it has an entire dependency map to know what could be impacted. And when you take that one step further, where you make your AI more business aware, then, I always challenge a lot of customers. I say, hey, again, every metric has a relationship with that business goal, that conversion. And then once I can start to tie it together, it makes sense. So the AI is going to then alert me to those metrics that typically are more volatile, right? Mm-hmm. And I start with those. And then there's always like the usual suspects where I look at, say, for example, I have a user journey and back on my Easy Travel application. I have 4 steps, right? I hit the home page, do a login, search, and purchase. And so I kind of keep a sharp eye on those steps because that's typically the 4 steps people take to get through to purchase. And I look at, hey, is there anything in terms of any one of those steps where duration might have a negative impact on that user experience? Of course. Like if I try and log in and it takes 10 seconds, I might not wait, I might leave. Okay, so now there's a relationship between long logins and conversions, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's error rates, JavaScript error rates increase. And so I need to understand that relationship. And then that, again, then feeds them to the BLO, right? Because then now I have it on my critical key user actions that are part of my user journey. And I understand everything from duration, largest contentful paint, error rate, and so forth. You kind of go down the kind of the usual suspect metrics. Those are a good starting point. And then AI is going to come back and say, hey, this application, maybe memory is very volatile. So then I'm going to start to say, well, what is the relationship between memory and conversions, right? Always tie it back to conversion, which is what is really the business is most interested in.
Mm-hmm. Now, which brings me to the next question. There was actually a note that I took in the very beginning, because and I'm just reading off my notes, you said conversion rate. You brought the example. One could be, does somebody go on our website and actually download our podcast, right? That's a conversion rate. Or obviously purchase, transfer funds. Mm-hmm. What about like non-classical, let's say, applications where immediately a conversion comes to mind? So I'll give you an example, Dynatrace, right? We have a software that people are using. What is a conversion rate in Dynatrace if we want to figure out if we are actually doing a good job?
So you're talking about people who go visit Dynatrace.com?
No, I'm talking about the product itself, right?
Our users.
Itself. Yeah. Like let's assume I'm a product manager at Dynatrace, and what should be my conversion rate metric? What's my conversion goal?
It depends really what you're trying to achieve, right? So say, for example, you've, in the product, there's a lot of times where it prompts to say, hey, there's a new feature, and you click to enable it, okay? And that alone could be a conversion goal, right? Because we're pushing out this, maybe it's just a new page, right? So the problem page, right? So it shows all the problems. There's a new visualization for that. Gives you a lot more filters and so forth. And you promote that right up in the top. It says, hey, click here for this new feature and also provide feedback. So now I could see like 2 conversion goals, one of which is I know how many users, we can see how many users are actually, launching Dynatrace and how many actually are clicking on that new feature. Yeah. And then how many are actually providing feedback, right? Yeah. Because if it's a great feature and if it's, kind of lighting the world on fire and it's doing like phenomenal, I guarantee you're going to get a lot of feedback. Yeah, and there's hopefully a lot of positive feedback. And so those are kind of different conversion goals that you can sit back and be able to monitor and manage that. How much feedback are we getting?
Yeah. So it's also, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought.
My thought was, this is perfect because this is, I think, something we need to get into the heads of everyone out there. When we are defining new features, I think one of our conversion goals has to be like feature adoption, feature interaction, and then, as you said, feedback is a great another is one of the steps in the user journey, because we want them to try out a new feature, use it, hopefully successfully, but in the end, definitely give us feedback. And these are it's like a conversion funnel, but the conversion funnel, for me, because we always talk about e-commerce so often, for me, the conversion funnel is always related to put something in a shopping cart and then check out. But in this case, it can be applied to any feature in any software product. And in this case, it's about feature adoption and then really getting also people to give us feedback. And I think this is something that hopefully some of the product managers are listening. And I know we have obviously internal ways on how we measure and monitor feature adoption at Dynatrace, and we use this to drive decisions. But I wanted to just highlight that conversion rate not necessarily has to be buying something on an e-commerce store, but it can be applied to any software feature that is implemented. And if you're not, and maybe this is something where what I'm saying now, if you don't know what your conversion goal is, then you should not even release something, because then you don't even know if you're successful with it.
It's hard to measure what you don't know.
Yeah, but I wonder if we're confusing some ideas here, right? There's the idea of feature adoption. Now, maybe it's my understanding of this, so I'll state what I was thinking about this is, it sounds like a lot more you're talking about feature adoption, Andy, as opposed to me, a conversion is something where there's a process, there's multiple steps to get from point A to point, I guess obviously point C. So again, using the Dynatrace product as an example, the Data Explorer, right? People being on that page is using that feature, but that's not a conversion. Conversion would be more like, hey, we want to make sure people are using the Data Explorer and putting those on dashboards. So the conversion then wouldn't just be heat map of how many people are on the data conversion page, which is people using that thing because they might just want to be looking at data in that and all that, but more like how many people are doing that and then putting that on a dashboard, which is that multi-step process of click click, and then have a final outcome. Because otherwise it's like, we see that there's other tools to show you heat maps and what features people are using, but there's not that process. I always think about the business level objective as a business process. And to your point, yes, it doesn't have to be, commerce related. It could be, as John was saying, creating an account, looking up a value, uploading documentation, right? But there's a process that you have to go through several steps, which you have to take into consideration UX design so that users know how to use it. You have to take into consideration performance on the front end, performance on the back end, ease of use, and track whether or not people are getting through that entire process, and if they're falling off, where they're falling off, and is it related to usability or is it related to performance? At least that's the way I've always looked at it. And I'm just wondering if we're blending the two there.
Well, you are, and I think they both have valid points, right? Because there may be certain goals in IT, in development. I developed this new feature, and I really want to make sure that our people enabling it. Right. And that could maybe just something. And there's not a lot more feedback other than the fact that, hey, I put this new feature out there. And I saw out of, the past month, we've had, 10,000 people enable this feature. Okay. So that's some good feedback to know that you're getting the volume of people that are at least trying to enable it. Now, to your point, Brian, what makes better sense is that are they actually using the feature as we designed? And is that are they easily able to then, like for the Data Explorer, be able to find their metric, visualize it, and put it onto a dashboard, right? And so then you start to track those steps to say, okay, yes, we have 10,000 people have now enabled this. How many tiles have been built with this, right? And then what was the experience of every time someone goes to build a tile? Because the idea behind the new Explorer is to improve that user experience, make it better than what it was before, which maybe might have been a little bit clumsy. Things are organized better. And then you could start to analyze that, saying, yes, I can start to see a massive improvement because we're measuring that user experience, and they seem to be having an optimal experience now whenever they deal with the Explorer, and add that to a particular tile to a dashboard.
Yeah, so it sounds like a conversion should, at least in my definition, and I wonder if there's others, should have at least 2 steps, right? Because you're starting at one point and getting to a second point. And it's whether or not you made it to that bit is where the conversion is, as opposed to just adoption, which is, are people on that page using it, which is very, very valid business piece as well. And that should have goals. You know, I think, Andy, to what you might have been getting at a little bit with the idea of if you can't define it, you shouldn't be putting it out. If we go way, way, way back to our interview with Goranka, when there was the idea of not only before you put out your feature and check it in, what's its performance criteria going to be and what's its adoption rate going to be for it to be successful, the idea of adding into that, you know, what is that conversion or adoption rate, putting that in there and clearly being able to define that. You know, what does adoption mean? What does conversion mean? And as you're putting those new features in, whether it's from I guess that would probably come more from the product manager, right? As opposed to the developer, at least the adoption and that, that's something that should be in some way or form checked in with that feature.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% correct, Brian, in that 2 steps is like the minimum. And then for this feature, I would look at 2 steps that they basically hit the Explore page, right? And then they clicked on the button to enable the new feature, right? So it's 2 steps, because then I could say, like my example before, 10,000 people clicked on that over, say, 30 days, right? Mm-hmm. How many people didn't? How many people went to that Explorer page and continue to use the old Explorer, right? And then you see maybe it's like 100,000. And then you're like, whoa, wow, we got far more people are ignoring that feature than actually using it. Why? You know, what is the reason behind it? And that's where we get into then maybe looking at the behavioral aspect of it. Is it something where maybe it's not intuitive to them that they should be clicking that, or they don't know enough about how good that feature is? Maybe the explanation there doesn't tell them that this is a life changer, right? It's going to save you from, you know, making these clumsy mistakes. It's a lot easier to be able to create dashboards with this newer feature than without. And so if you can promote that, have that visible, then that should in turn drive up those conversion rates, because you understand the behavior. You're trying to understand the reason why people aren't enabling it. And that's kind of where you start to drive those conversion goals and the understanding of it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Hey, maybe just having a quick discussion on who is responsible for defining these metrics, who is held accountable in case they're not met, who makes sure that these metrics are captured and evaluated in an automated way, because otherwise this doesn't, you know, make sense at all. What do you see in your world? Because I have kind of my theory about it. Yeah,
it kind of depends on the company, right? So we see a lot of larger size companies, they have, you know, these roles of data scientists are really starting to take over more and more. And so, and the reason why is because the data scientists typically have their hands in all these different pots, right? So they're working with operations, development, the business side. And so they're just trying to bring all that and marry that together. So they're understanding and building those types of relationships between a metric and what the business cares about is like conversions and so forth. And so they work with those teams to be able to establish that. The business and anyone that has any kind of stake in the application, which should be just pretty much everybody from development operations all the way through, is they're the consumers of that. Because ultimately, someone, like if you go back to the feature example, somebody is responsible for that feature, right? And so they want to measure it, but then they also want to understand the behavioral aspects behind that as well. And so that's where the data scientists will connect those dots, but the stakeholder, whoever is responsible for the feature, will, you know, manage and monitor that. So the more and more else you can automate, the better. So, it's obviously it kind of varies. Smaller groups, sometimes they put the onus on like operations or so forth, or maybe like you're monitoring champion within the organization. Sometimes like a data scientist can be very, very neutral, right? Because they work with all groups. But when you get to say someone who maybe is more like on the operational side and they just happen to be managing the performance management solutions, and then when it comes to creating business KPIs and business SLOs and so forth, they are or BLOs, sorry. It's maybe an operational person, and the issue typically with that is that are they truly biased? Because what if it's that CPU IO weight issue? Are they really going to want to maybe potentially expose something that they've recommended that's undersized? So we see a lot of times where it just depends on an organization that you kind of maybe run into some of those, maybe a biased view of it as well. But the more you can remove that and put it into a newer role, like a data scientist or someone who's not really directly responsible for development or the operation side of things and kind of is that conduit between all of it, then that's where things kind of tend to excel. And they're much, much more successful in being able to create those BLOs, KPIs, manage those, and then ultimately put those into some form of reporting or a dashboard so everybody can consume them. That needs to know and needs to have that information available to make the right decisions.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to your cool advanced dashboards and the reason why people love you so much in the hot days, because you're really building beautiful dashboards that can be understood.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, hey, I know it's been unfortunately through the whole pandemic and that we couldn't travel that much, so we didn't see each other as much as we used to. That's why I didn't get a chance to actually talk to you about what happened in the last 18 months in terms of any new metrics that you've seen kind of popping up, any new trends, any new things that like what does a cool, important like business level objective look like right now these days, and how has this changed over the last couple of months and years?
Yeah, so the more and more, I deal with metrics and dashboarding every day. I deal with customers and always getting a lot of good recommendations from customers. And it really starts to go when you start to combine things together, right? Because again, like I mentioned, metrics are all related to conversions, but other metrics are related to themselves as well. And so you start to think outside the box a little bit. And kind of like one of the jokes I had mentioned earlier to someone else is that define your role, right? They didn't kind of really understand the space. And I told them I'm a quarter accountant, right? I'm a quarter CSI crime, scene investigator, all right? I'm a quarter therapist, and I'm a quarter artist, right? I call myself an artist, right? Because it's like from an accountant point of view, I got to crunch a lot of things. I got to really relate and I'm dealing with numbers all the time, right? And from the CSI perspective, I work with customers where there was a crime scene or what we call an anomaly, right? So I go in and I basically work with them to understand what caused the potential issue. So you need to be able to gather that data because that's valuable data, right? The past is always a good indication of what the future holds. And to fully understand that is how you establish, those data points and bring them out to be able to now start to monitor that so that thing doesn't happen again. And then the therapist part, right, is because then I need to understand those relationships, right? I need to dig deep into how is this related back to the business, or how these two different types of metrics related together, what makes sense in terms of being able to create maybe this new type of metric. And then the artist part comes in here because then I got to put it up into a dashboard that makes sense where everyone can look at it and understand it, right? So some of the metrics that we start to have come up that we evolve is one where I look at the stability, right? What is stability, and how does stability or the stableness of an application impact conversions? And so I'll go back to my user journey, right? And I look at each of the different steps from, home, login, search, purchase, and so forth. If I look at just say back to login, we looked at that earlier, how stable is login? And how I determine stability is I look at the maximum and minimum response time. And I determine what is the range, right? And ideally, a very stable environment is going to have the same login response time. And so in that range should be very close to 0. That's the perfect world, right? And when I slice that metric, right, because I have stability, and I say, what is the stability of login for users that convert? What is the stability of login for users that abandon? And what is the stability for users that actually exit the site at the login step? And I start to compare that. And then I might see a scenario where users that exit the site have 120-second range, right? Their stability is 120 seconds. Where users that continue, maybe it's like 3 seconds, okay? And then I know I've identified the issue, because now what that's telling me is that people are leaving the site are leaving because they are some long-running logins. There's these outliers, right? And I need to be able to then quickly go and identify and isolate those outliers and figure out exactly why did it take 3-4 minutes for the login page to load for these users, because every single one of them exited the site. They abandoned, right? But more importantly, they left the site, right? And so stability is one, and it's something, you always look at metrics like, hey, what's the max duration, min duration, average duration, 90th percentile, all these different things. But when you start to combine some together, you create this new metric called stability. Another one, right? You asked for metrics. I have metrics, right? Is engagement rate, all right? Now, when I look at an application, I kind of say, then we go back to my easy travel application. How long does it typically take someone to move through the user journey from the homepage to purchase? And pad a little bit onto that. So I say, for example, maybe it takes, we'll give them 3 minutes. They should be able to work their way through that journey to be able to search for travel, select it, edit the cart, check out, purchase, and they're done. All right. What are the number of steps that are required to get through that user journey? Say, in my case, I had 4, but there's some other steps I'm just not too interested in. So say it's like 10 steps. Now what I look for is to say, okay, first query I run is to find out how many sessions have entered my user journey. Okay, so I get my total funnel count or session count. And then I say, how many sessions spent more than 3 minutes on my site and had less than 10 actions? Because to me, there's an engagement issue. If it takes them more than 3 minutes to get through that funnel, something's not right. Maybe they don't know once they search for travel, they have trouble figuring out that they got to click in and edit the cart or do something, right? It's not maybe intuitive. And so when I flag that, so more than 3 minutes, less than 10 actions, that's not a really engaged session, right? And then so I track that. And now I do the math, right? So the number of sessions that I determined that were not engaged divided by sessions, and I get my engagement rate. Then, all right, I do the same analysis. What is the engagement rate for users that convert, engagement rate for users that abandon, and users that exit, right? And see how different that is. And then I can see that something pops up, right? And same type of analysis for errors, duration, all that. It's just all about understanding the metric and then figuring out the behavior of the user, whether they convert, abandon, or exit. And is there a delta? Is there a difference? And if it is, then you found the area. In my case here, it's like I'm an outdoors guy from the Detroit area. It's like now I know where I need to go fish, right? That's where the fish are, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a big lake out there, but by being able to play out some of these metrics, then I can hone in on exactly what the issue is.
Hey John, with this idea, right, this engagement rate, this is very enlightening. And my question about it, though, is it sounds like you're being put in a position to figure these things out, come up with these new metrics. Is there any industry guideline from this point of view? Do we have, a nice, good set of, is it Wild West where people have to create? I mean, because what you're doing, right, and I think it's really amazing, is you're saying, hey, let's take a look at some of these metrics, let's see if this ties back to anything, because then we know that there's a relation. And when you talk about even like user engagement, right, how many of those people might have just been distracted, right? It's very soft data, if you will, because it's just the nature of it, because we're dealing with the actual end user. It's not the computer. It's not like ticks on the CPU clock. This is, someone might stop and pick their nose for a little bit and then get back, and that starts throwing some of the metrics off. But we can't weed those out, right? They just get it. They're in the fold. There's nothing we can do about that. But as you're going through and finding new ways to analyze data, new ways to try to find correlations between, okay, we saw this all happen and this, the conversions went down, so could be a possibility. Let's look into this. Is it all up to, let's say, the data scientists or the accountants in your role at that point, or actually that would be the CSI at that point, to make these things? Or do you have has there been a tried and true thing of like, here's your hit list to start with? Like if we think, Andy, Steve Souders, right? The hit list for browser performance. Is there a hit list of great places to start with this? Or is it really just going in and trying to, obviously you're trying to standardize some of it, but are you able to work from something, or is it all just Wild West at this point?
You try and come up with a standard, right? So like Google, for example, came up with some Core Web Vitals, right? It's the largest contentful pane, and right, so they kind of publish these different metrics and how it's calculated. Industry solutions like ours, adapt to that. We provide that as a metric that we can look at. But when I start to go and start to play with and kind of create these terms, stability, this engagement rate and so forth, and combining those, there are some guidelines that are out there, right? It's not completely Wild West, but they are, basically where you can do enough research to find that the typical e-commerce site, if I look at just say like a page load, if the page load takes more than say 7 seconds or whatever the number is, the chance of people leaving is significant, right? So they have a lot of good metrics like that. And so sometimes it's where I take a look at that particular metric, right? The length of a page load. And then I sort of say, okay, well, how would that relate into when I start to determine this min-max instability metric that I have? Because there's some things that I can pull that are out there, but there's not like a place where someone's advertising that application stability should be X, right? So we just have to kind of like, in that case, we feel our way out. And so, to me, it's like, if you guys ever followed the NBA, right? Rasheed Wallace from the Detroit Pistons would say, ball don't lie, right? They always would say, ball don't lie, right? Because he complained he got fouled and person missed a free throw. And he would say, ball don't lie. I say data don't lie, right? And so we've been working with a lot of customers, and we start to deploy this out there. So we start to look to say, is this stability, is it really kind of making sense? Are we actually starting to see where we do have wide range? Is it because of what we perceive as that users are going to be abandoning at a higher rate because that stability goes up? And so we start to measure that. And we have a lot of customers that are using this, and we get a lot of good feedback, a lot of good data. And so that's kind of how we justify it. It's, there isn't, some of these engagement, there's no site where I can go and figure out what is a typical engagement rate for, basically Andy Grabner's podcast site or something like that. You just have to kind of feel it out. So some of these, it also requires you like, well, where do you come up with 3 minutes and 10 actions? It's that you have to work with the people who know the application, right? They'll kind of get a feel for what we have in mind. A user, I look at it as kind of the reverse of Vegas. Like Vegas is that the longer you stay in the casino, they want you there, you tend to lose more money, right? Applications are the opposite. The longer you probably stay in the site, the chance of you converting probably goes down. You can measure that, right? And you can validate is that a true assumption, and then feed that into your engagement equation, because then it follows from there.
And who, just to wrap up on that one, who, like if a listener or anybody, right, wanted to start doing this stuff, who would be the best person to talk to in the organization, or what would that role be? Would it, product manager may or may not, and would like business team, but like who, like where would they go to find out like what should we be looking at in our industry, right? Whether it's commerce, whether it's banking or whatever, what are some of these like business related metrics that make more sense in different industries to track? Like who would they go talk to collaborate? Any ideas on that, or am I stumping you there based on your
It's, again, it goes back to like an application owner, but what we're starting to see is the C level, right? They're really starting to understand the importance of it, right? So, for example, can't name the grocer, but this grocery, business is starting to change, right? And I look at like a grocery store as like the Blockbuster, right? Because everyone used to go to Blockbuster to get videos, and then suddenly this thing called streaming came along and they all went away. Grocery stores are kind of going through like this revolution right now. It came on because of COVID, where people were hesitant to go order groceries online and have them delivered or go pick them up because they didn't trust right? That they would get the right type of produce.
I still don't.
COVID. I do, because they're also our customers too, so you got to support them. But anyhow, I figured I'd get all these bruised bananas and all that kind of stuff. So when COVID hit, it was like nobody wanted to go in the grocery stores. It's like that's where everyone was going because that's the only place that was open. Kind of the worst place to go. So you do order online, and I realized that I got some pretty darn good produce. I had no problem, and if I ever had something wrong, they just dropped a fresh one off on my porch. It's like this is perfect, right? And so now the grocery business is realizing that is kind of the future, right? And so then now when they look and say, well, what we used to measure before is different because now this whole ability for these different grocery store employees going down aisles and scanning and building and fulfilling your order. That needs to be measured and monitored, right? And then so that direction for this grocery chain came from a very high level. At the C level, it's saying that we need to manage and monitor this like we never have before because that's going to be the future of our business, right? And so they're establishing those business level objectives, those KPIs as to what is a successful ordering online or having groceries delivered business model look like. And what things should we measure as we continue to go forward? And so that's why, we kind of then work with those type of grocery organizations to help them, right? Because it's a journey. Everything's a journey.
Mm.
Like Bilbo Baggins' journey.
Yeah. I got to say.
Singing the song.
Yeah. Talk about songs.
The Bilbo song, yeah. You don't know that one, Andy.
No.
Leonard Nimoy sang, yeah.
Well, hey, I do. Hopefully that answers your question, but I do want to flip the tables. Can I flip the tables? Do I have time? I think Andy knows about this a little bit. We talked about it earlier.
I think so. I think I know what's coming. I have a rough idea. If we can make it work in 5 minutes, that would be awesome.
In 5 minutes. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a game. Okay. So I'm going to say it's the name of the game, and it has nothing to do with show tunes from Sound of Music. Okay. So you're good, Andy. The name of the game is Name That Metric. Okay. So, and the category is revenue dashboard. All right. Some, Brian, you've seen a lot of revenue dashboards, some that I've created out there. Uh-huh. And so this metric, guys got to guess the metric and give you 3 clues. All right. I'm going to go through it fast. We got 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the first clue is that this metric is, I think it's the single most important metric from a revenue perspective.
Conversion rate.
You say conversion rate. What do you say, Brian?
I thought there were 3 clues.
It's a revenue dashboard. I'm giving you one. You got to guess, and then give you another clue, and then that's how it kind of works.
And it's the most important. It's the most important to what?
What is the most important metric that I should put on my revenue dashboard? This is revenue, right? So I have easy travel.
Cart value.
Okay. Kind of getting there close. Andy, maybe a little closer. Okay.
Well, I couldn't steal his answer. I had to try an alternate path.
Okay. All right. Well, here. Okay. So number 2, as I go through here, let's see. Outside, I've created a lot of these revenue dashboards. So outside of the dashboards I created, I've yet to see this metric used in any revenue dashboard. I haven't seen it appear other than the dashboards I've created. So, you want to take a second guess at it, or should I just go to the third clue?
Maybe it's something to do with average clicks per revenue, something like this. Like how many clicks? Like
this is also related to the first question, right?
Yeah. So
Andy was closer. It's closer to conversions.
Andy was very close with conversions.
But it's not.
Maybe it has to do with like the conversion rate based on engagement. It has to be an engagement rate metric because I really am fascinated about the engagement rate discussion we had. So it has to do something with.
So Andy, you're getting close.
Conversion duration?
Because we have time. Getting close there. So, and more importantly, this metric will identify the root cause. In my experience, in about 60% of the time, that just looking at that metric, I knew exactly what the issue was, and I had no further triage that I needed to do. Right? Any idea?
It's the conversion rate based on initial load of the first page that people get to, because otherwise they'll bounce off.
You're close. It's a revenue dashboard, right? So if they bounce off the first page, then I'm not going to have them on the revenue. So Andy, you're close with conversion rate. So So this, on to the final round here. So let me paint a picture and kind of describe it. So I have my review dashboard, right? And users read dashboards left to right, top down, right? So you put your most important content up on the top, right? And the dashboard should really do three things. Is everything good? Are you trending in the right direction? And is there anything that I need to do, including biz operations, anything we need to do right now, right? And so that revenue dashboard should tell that. So my revenue dashboard, and I'll just focus on the top. Maybe there's some other pie charts and crap I put on below, but just on the top, right? I have sum of my revenue, right? So for my time frame for like say 2 hours, I'll put up my sum of revenue, and let's just say it's 5,000, right? And then what I also do is typically right below it, I say, what is the revenue from the previous time frame? Because I need to understand the trend. Are we trending in the right direction? Yeah. And so I'll put it there and say, for example, on my dashboard that shows 10,000, right? And then I do things like, a couple more metrics. I have risk revenue. What is that? That's like revenue where the user's experience was not satisfied, right? So they're tolerated, frustrated, but they still converted. They generated revenue, but it's a risk because they may not do this again because they had a bad experience. And then lost revenues, abandoned carts. And so we track that and we show the current time frame, previous time frame, those metrics going across. All right, so now with those metrics, do I have everything I need? Am I missing something? And, the answer is, yeah, I'm missing something, right? Because if I were to tell you, Andy and Brian, that, hey, we currently in this time frame, so these last 2 hours, we did 5,000 in revenue, but the previous 2 hours we did 10,000, you'd say like, oh my God, something's wrong. My hair's on fire. I need to fix this, right? But you're missing a key metric, right? And, the same story I could tell if I just replace revenue with claims, right? The number of claims processed, number of risk claims, number of people who abandoned a claim, right? But I can also do the same, and Andy was kind of hidden on the point here, with a conversion dashboard, right? So I can do conversions, risk conversions, and loss conversions or abandons, right? And what is one of the most important things I said up front? And Andy, you kind of had it right. You said the conversion rate. That's the most important thing at businesses is kind of looking at. That's the number one metric is conversion rate. Now let's flip it to revenue. So what is the most important measure? If for conversions, the most important, or for business, the conversion rate is the most important metric. For revenue,
it's the ratio between revenue at stake, basically your lost revenue or your whatever you called it, towards the actual revenue.
I think you pretty much went around it. It's called revenue rate. Right? I have it on my dashboard. I've never seen another dashboard, right? And that's the sum of revenue divided by session count. So if you go back to my example, currently I have 5K. Previously it was 10K, right? And everyone thinks their hair's on fire. But now with the revenue rate metric on that dashboard, I can see that the current revenue rate is 100, right? So it's about $100 per session. And the previous revenue rate, hey, it's 100 as well. What does that tell me? By looking at the one metric, I can see that, we just had a 50% drop in traffic, right? And there's nothing bad going on with my app, my infrastructure user experience, because my revenue rate is consistent, 100 for both. The volume 2 hours ago was significantly better. This time frame, it's 50% less. So I need to go talk to my marketing team to better promote advertiser website to increase traffic. Problem solved. Without the revenue rate, you would have been digging into like, John told us about all these, relationship metrics, and I got to go find engagement rates and all this, and those are important. But when the revenue rate is showing something that's consistent over time, then it's just traffic.
All right, Andy's got to run. Andy's got to
really need to run. I'm really sorry, John. You guys finished this, but I learned a lot of new stuff. In the email, if you teach me at least one new item today, then it's a win situation. I think I learned more than one thing today. Sure. And awesome. I want to say thank you. I'll talk to you soon. You guys wrap it up. Sorry to have to jump.
And I'll wrap it up.
Bye-bye, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. John, I think this was fascinating because I got to run too. But I think, it's funny because you've been bugging me forever to come on. Right? I think there's more I want to talk to you about. I do have another meeting right now, though, so I think maybe I'll talk to Andy and we'll definitely have you back because I think, and just to give a preview for our listeners and for you, I think a lot of this ties into or expands into the SRE world. because when you think about site reliability, it's mostly about is the site up and available and running. But then what that's not doing is looking at the ideas of the conversions and the user satisfaction and all that other stuff. And I think that ties directly into this. There's a lot of crossover and a lot of ways that both of those can be used with each other, but also have some more subsets. Anyway, my mind was racing when you were discussing all this stuff. So fascinating stuff.
And I think it just, my last parting comment, I know you got to go, but I'm going to try and keep it as long as I can. Is the second you can, basically make your AI business aware, where you don't have to create and start to manually look at these different relationships between the technical data and the business side.
Yeah.
When AI can actually effectively do that, which is not there yet, but will be soon, it's really kind of game over. And that's kind of where people are marching towards. And so between now, we just either feed the AI, try and make it more smarter, or provide metrics and dashboards to show you that it's engagement rate, it's revenue rate, it's this issue. Right?
And the key to all this is collecting all this data, right? This all comes back to observability and not just back-end observability, right? We talk to customers about this all the time. We're like, I just want to find out how my, or our operations teams, right? That just want to know how their servers are performing. Well, how about the code that's running on those servers? And how about the end users that are engaged with the code that are running on those servers in that environment, wherever it might be? It's all feeding into the same thing. At the end of the day, it's all to feed the business. So, very, very important stuff.
Awesome.
I think we definitely want to have you back. There's a lot more we can talk about. It's funny because you've been fighting to get on the show for a while. and to be honest, it's not that we've been resisting. It's just like, it's always like, hey, what do you want to talk about? And then you would never come back. So, so I think now that we've had you on, we open the floodgates, and hopefully our listeners enjoy this. And if anybody has any questions, if anybody has any questions that they want us to bring up or talk to John about for the next time we have him on, please send them to pure_DT. Or tweet them at pure_DT, or you can send an email to pureperformance@dynatrace.com. Thanks you very, very much, John. We look forward to talking to you again, and thanks for all the work you're doing with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye now.